So, thank you. Welcome today to another Climate Matters show, coming to you live from COP21 in Paris. My name is Stuart Scott, and I'll be your host today. And this is my email address. Please, anyone in the audience or anyone out in internet land, do be in touch with me if you like, if you have questions or follow-up. And people have been using this. Not overwhelming, but enough that I can handle it. So our web presence is climatematters.tv, where we're assembling all of these, I like to call them dots, that people need to connect. Half-hour videos from UN meetings, Bonn, Germany last year, in Lima this year in Paris. And here are some hashtags. If you are into tweeting or Instagram, please use them. Now, today's guests I have with us on the stage, Reverend Sally Bingham, who is the president and founder of Interfaith, Power and Light, the Regeneration Project, and we'll ask her to speak about that in a moment. And we have Professor Paul Beckwith, who's a climate researcher and educator, and he's with the Department of Geography at the University of Ottawa. So, Sally, would you tell us a bit about the Regeneration Project?
Well, the Regeneration Project has a mission statement to deepen the connection between ecology and faith. And in 1997, we launched a campaign called Interfaith, Power and Light with the purpose of being a religious response to global warming, because we see climate change as the most important and perhaps the most important moral challenge of today. And so the Interfaith, Power and Light program, the campaign, asks people of faith to respond to climate change by cutting their own carbon emissions. And we ask the facility, the congregations that we work with, to cut their carbon emissions and serve as an example to the community. And currently we have 18,000 congregations involved in the program, and we're in 40 states around the U.S.
When you say congregations, are we only talking about Christian congregations?
No, absolutely not. We're talking about an entirely interreligious group. We have Jains, Muslims, Jews, Christians, evangelicals, Roman Catholics, Buddhists. Every mainstream religion is involved in this program.
Oh, fantastic. And I know I'm on your mailing list, so occasionally I will, because my organization is an interfaith organization, so occasionally I'll get an email to love your mother, the earth, for Valentine's or something like that.
That's from our national preach-in that we do every year. And we ask clergy around the country in all denominations to preach about protection of creation and climate change on a particular day, which is often around Valentine's Day. We're changing it. Next year it's going to be on Earth Day.
Oh, good. Change it up a little bit.
And then we have sample sermons on our websites in all these different denominations.
Wonderful. And so I guess the response, you would say, has been very good.
Excellent. Far more response and at a much higher level than I ever anticipated.
Now, this is the kind of growth that we need. I preach my own thesis, which is that we have grown, the human economy has grown too large for the container. And we're feeling that drastically, first in climate and then other things close behind, the water cycle, the nitrogen cycle, all of these different dimensions on which our ecology is being stressed to the failing point. So I don't believe we can grow anymore in physical terms. But in spiritual terms, there's certainly a lot of room for growth. So thank you very much. Mm-hmm. Now, Paul, can you tell us a little bit about your history with the climate issue?
Yes. I study abrupt climate change. So I'm a researcher and an educator, and I have a top-down approach to look at the climate system as a whole, to look at the different elements like the Arctic sea ice, snow cover, methane in the Arctic, how it influences jet streams, the whole picture. So all of the different elements of the atmosphere, ocean, and other elements of the climate system, how they interact, and feedbacks and so on, and how quickly they can change.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a synopsis, because I know you are prolific on the internet. How often do you put out a video about the problem?
I usually try to put out a video or two per week, and I've recently passed 100 videos, and I post them all on. I'll be posting them on Climate Matters and also on my own new website, paulbeckwith.net.
Yeah, thank you. And Paul's been helping me a tremendous amount, because he's already learned how to configure the various social media that I've had very little time to do. So thank you, Paul. Thank you. And I won't go into it, but we've had a few miracles in getting him here this week, since he did not have a badge. But thank you. Thank you for joining us. Now, while you were both speaking, I put up the title of today's session. It's on the other side, Sally. Moral Obligation and Scientific Imperative. So, Sally, would you speak to what you feel the moral obligation is?
Well, I think that each and every one of us has a responsibility for not only ourselves and our immediate families, but we certainly have a responsibility for the folks that come after us, the next generations. And I also think, because creation involves flora, fauna, and everything that God created, that we have a responsibility for every single thing that's sacred, and that we can't neglect that. And if we care, if we put a values message on what is climate change doing to the poor nations and poor people around the world, we have to think about how our behavior affects them. God calls us not only to love God, but to love our neighbors as ourselves. If we love our neighbors, we don't pollute our neighbors' air or water, and we are responsible for how we behave. It also, in my perspective, I think how we respond to climate change will reflect our relationship with God and certainly with each other. And if we love God and God loves the creation, we have a moral obligation to take care of the creation.
Thank you. And while you were speaking, I thought it might be good, if you'll allow me, to somewhat secularize that message, because I like to think of myself as very well scientifically trained, with one foot solidly in the science of physical reality, but also a very, very spiritual individual with the other foot solidly in the metaphysical world. So I want to try to bridge those two. Whether or not you are a believer in any faith, there is still a moral obligation. I know I grew up in New York City, and there was a school of ethical culture, which was a non-religious school of morality. It was, I don't want to call it pseudo, that's the wrong word, but it was analogous to a religious institution, where people who were probably atheists or agnostics would come because they felt this moral obligation, this calling. And it doesn't matter whether you call the source of that calling God or cosmic mind. It doesn't matter. It's our heart. Wherever it is, it's calling to us from our heart. And I think, forgive me for maybe pseudo-preaching, but I think that God speaks to us through our heart, or nature speaks to us through our heart, or our fellow humans and creatures on earth speak to us. This is our receptor. This is where we feel the moral obligation, or where we block it. And unfortunately, our civilization, which is dominated by money and the fulfillment of our wants, we block our heart a lot. We don't give. We don't do for others. We don't see others, ourselves in others, unfortunately.
May I respond to that, Stuart?
Please.
Because you touched on something that, when I preach or I deliver a moral message from a theological perspective, someone in the audience has often asked, do you have to be a person of a particular denomination or a person of so-called faith to be moral? And of course not. And there is a moral pull in each of us. And if we can tap into that, we see these responsibilities. When I talk about the moralness, if you will, of this subject, it comes from a theological perspective. I mean, if you are a religious person and you profess a love for God, then you have even more of a responsibility to protect others and God.
Yes.
But you certainly don't have to be a person of a particular religious faith to be moral.
Now, there are a lot of people who kind of point a finger at religion or various religions and say, why are you doing bad things? Well, I think at the core of all the religions on earth, we have the same essential truth. But unfortunately, when the founders are long gone, sometimes little things get added in. I think perhaps I'm from one of the Abrahamic traditions. I think the word in the Old Testament that where you will have domain, I can't quote scripture, but where God says you will have domain over the earth, I think it's misinterpreted. That's my own take on it. Domain doesn't mean conquer. Domain means it's your home, domus, Latin. Take care of it. How would you take care of your home? The earth is your home, our only home. There is no planet B, so to speak.
The word is not domain, it's dominion.
Dominion. Thank you. Thank you. Again, I don't profess to be a man of Scripture at all. Now, I think we can perhaps take this moment to lighten up and do something a little bit different today. We have with us, let me say, I think I'm behind one slide. Let me go on to the next slide. We have with us a gentleman by the name of Baba Brinkman, and he's going to come up and do a rap on the subjects that we're dealing with.
Hello, is this on? Thanks for including me in this event. I've been to the Center for Ethical Culture, Stuart, that you described, and have done rap performances there as well. And, as a secular person myself, I did want to find some common ground here. So I was very inspired by His Holiness St. Francis's epistle, Laudato Si, and I was wondering what it would sound like if Pope Francis had been a rapper in his younger years and decided to...
I do have to say, since we just created the slide with your background music, I'm not sure it's going to work. I haven't tried it from here, but
okay,
if not, then you're a cappella.
If not, I'll go a cappella, but hopefully we'll get the the backing music in the slide. So I attempted a hip-hop interpretation of the Pope's encyclical, and I'm going to, with all due respect, do my best impression of the Pope if he were a rapper. So let's see if this will play.
It's working.
En viro Christo Domino climato Deus ex machina, etc. Laudato Si. Praise God, the Creator. Laudato Si. These techno-capitalists don't want to mess with me. They just picked an epic rap battle of history. They're trying to defend carbon. Well, I'm the Holy See. I'm the Pope. This world is a paradise, and we're degrading it with our dominant technocratic paradigm. It's time for an ecological conversion. I'm as sure of that as I'm sure the Lord was born of a virgin. This earth is our home. There's nowhere else to go. We're worshiping a false god called unlimited growth. We're poisoning the oceans and the air with carbon. We're making a golden calf out of the free market. This earth is our home. We're created out of its dust. If we don't put limits on appetites, they diminish us. The root cause of global warming and inequality is rampant consumerism, spiritual poverty. I'm the first pope with the sense of rhythm. At the heart of my faith is environmentalism. As a Christian, I can say that today's market fundamentalism is worse than any fundamentalism found in religion. But radical change is coming. Stop ignoring the problem. The most prosperous are destroying the global commons, while the most vulnerable watch as the sea level rises. That's a sure path to mutual destruction and violence. Anything less than a total shift in mentality is nothing less than selling our collective soul for a salary. Worshipping gold is a fallacy. Stop asking for more. Stop feeding your addictions off of the backs of the poor. It's a moral imperative to step back from self-destruction and reform the whole system of production and consumption. consumption, rich countries owe poor countries an ecological debt. They block international action out of national interest. Selfish individual consumers driven by greed. Selfish companies fight to protect their subsidies. Selfish countries driven by economic development. Whatever we do next, history is going to remember it. And don't trust market solutions like cap and trade. That's a trick to keep polluting, even if you have to pay. And those who say we need population control are dodging. We could feed 10 billion easily with greater equality. It's not about government policy. It's about changing consciousness. No technocratic fix for sustained obnoxiousness. These aren't just my views. They're also Jesus's. We need to protect nature, y'all, and also fetuses. I had to slip that in case you forgot I was Catholic, but mostly we're protecting the poor from the affluent and protecting this earth, our common home, from the tyranny of unlimited economic growth. So point to the sky where the carbon is accumulating. Point to the ground where the carbon needs to stay. Point to the left where our political future lies. Point to the right, which is resistant to change. Come on, everybody, point to the sky where the carbon is accumulating. Point to the ground where the carbon needs to stay. Point to the left, or your left, where our future lies. And point to the right, which is resistant to change. Faster now, point to the sky, and point to the ground, and point to the left, and point to the right. Faster again, point to the sky, point to the ground, point to the left, point to the right. Laudato Si. Thank you.
Wow. I don't know if I was prepared for that. You all seem to have enjoyed it, and I don't think it's stepped on anyone's orthodox toes. So thank you. Thank you. Those really were tweets from, you didn't simulate those tweets?
I should clarify that. I wanted to represent how the Pope was summarizing Laudato Si in his tweets, but if I had put his exact words in the tweets, it would have created too much cognitive dissonance while listening to the rap.
Okay.
So I paraphrased the Pope's tweets, but each of those tweets are based on something that he actually said in Laudato Si or placed on Twitter, and I can show people, if they're interested, the sort of interpretations I did, and I think they're fair and accurate representing his views.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was mind-blowing. Thank you. Wow. Okay, I think I'll recover from that in a moment. We'll get back to our conversation here at Climate Matters. Now, Paul, let's, if we can we get my slides back on that side? There we go. Can you speak to the scientific imperative?
Yes. We don't have much time to act. I think most people are realizing that. In a nutshell, the Arctic region, the entire region, is getting darker. It's absorbing more solar radiation, and therefore it's heating. So we call it Arctic temperature amplification. It's warming much faster than the global average, much faster than the equator. So the temperature difference is dropping between the equator and the Arctic, and this temperature difference determines the nature and behavior of the jet streams. So the jet streams are slowing down and becoming stuck. And because we're warmer, there's more water vapor in the air. So we're getting an extreme increase in the frequency, severity, and duration of extreme weather events globally. And they're also happening in regions where they never happened before. So the danger is this process continues and we lose Arctic sea ice in the summer, say by 2020 or so. If that happens at the end of the summer, then these extreme weather events will get a lot worse, and we also then will risk methane emissions from the permafrost on land and from the seafloor sediments, and that will greatly amplify the warming.
Now, I'm breaking in because I know you can go on for a half hour, an hour, 2 hours. We only have perhaps 9 minutes left.
Yep.
I want to chunk that. I want to take that in little bits. So if I can paraphrase it. So the difference between the heat at the equator and the cold at the Arctic is lessening.
Yes.
And so cold air that used to go around the Arctic is now dipping down further.
Yes.
Which is why you get colder winters in certain places. I know we had a very cold winter in Hawaii last winter, unusually cold. And they're having 95 degree days in Alaska in winter, in Fairbanks. So is that what you're talking about?
Yes, that's the basic idea. And what is new, say, in the last year or two, is now the ocean currents are changing. So the Gulf Stream is slowing, and it's not moving as far north. So it's moving further south, so the temperature is warmer. And where it used to go, the temperature is colder. So we talk of cold blobs south of Greenland, and we talk of warm blobs west of the off the west coast of the U.S., contributing to drought. So the heat is transferred from the equator to the Arctic in both the jet stream, the atmosphere, and the oceans. And because the heat transfer is changing, the whole climate system in the atmosphere and oceans is changing. So when we talk of weather events, all weather events that we have now are occurring under a different climate system. And the climate system is different because we've changed the chemistry of both the oceans and the atmosphere with our CO2 emissions.
Yeah, thank you. There's a tremendous amount of science in there. I hope that people in the internet land are able to pick that apart and reverse through it, because I know you've covered many very important points.
So solutions, the COPs are all about reducing emissions, and as time passes, we'll see that we have to zero emissions, and I think that the time frame to do that will get shorter and shorter as severe weather events continue. But I only see that as one part of a three-legged bar stool. A second leg of the bar stool is carbon dioxide removal, getting the CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere down to 350. And this is what Hansen's been saying.
Now, Hansen, let me, for the audience, say, Hansen he's iconic, so we in the climate community refer to him by his last name. It's Dr. James Hansen, who was for 42 years the head of NASA's Goddard Institute in New York that studied Earth and space science. And he, responding to a question when he was with us last week, I asked him to disambiguate between 2 degrees centigrade and 1.5 degrees centigrade as the target that is being used across the way in the negotiations. And he said he prefers not to use either, that what we really need to do is get back down under 350 parts per million of CO2 and equivalents. And right now we are 15 to 20% above that. So we have a lot of work cut out for us. And if I can, people will be asking me for the next several weeks, how do you think we did at the COP, the agreement? Because there will be an agreement of some sort that comes out of it. And I've already been saying, no matter how strong it appears to be, it will not nearly be strong enough to save us. And that's really the tragedy of what's going on, because they're negotiating for the wrong targets, and they're loosey-goosey about commitments instead of legally binding. So the politicians are still not with it. And again, you'll forgive me, I'm going to put my foot in there once more. I'm going to debate you on how much time we have left to reduce our carbon emissions. I think we're talking about negative time. I think we are already out of time, and we're really kind of over the edge and kind of swimming up the waterfall is the way I see it, but that's my personal proclivity. So.
Yeah. I mean, I'm agreeing that we're out of time, so I'm saying that we need to look at negative emissions, if you like, carbon dioxide removal.
Now, if I can direct it back to you, Sally, there was something that came up in a press conference that I attended, where the Pacific Islanders, who are very faithful in the Christian tradition, and I didn't quite get the point, were saying that I thought God said that it wouldn't be a flood next time after the story of Noah. And yet their islands are going under, so they're feeling it as the biblical flood again. How do we, if I come across, because I will be dealing with Pacific Islanders again, how do I handle that kind of?
Well, I think that was a covenant between God and Noah that you're talking about, and a covenant involves a relationship. So if one party behaves badly and the other party behaves badly, or if one group holds up its end of the bargain but the other one doesn't, the covenant is broken. Now, that's also a literal interpretation of the Bible, which is not something that most Anglicans do. In some cases, we can use it literally if we need to, but it isn't really what we're supposed to do. It's a metaphor for life, and there are folks within the Christian tradition who say that God would never allow another flood, but I think that God expects a responsible behavior from his children, from us, and if we don't behave properly, we're going to suffer the consequences. Yeah. And I think that's what's happening to the island nations, that those of us that have not behaved carefully and respectfully of the sacredness of life and the sacredness of creation, there are people who are suffering the consequences of our actions. It's one of the reasons I think this COP is so important, and that the Secretary of State from the U.S. doubled the financial commitment from the United States to help these nations.
Yeah, there are signs of improvement all around, but not fast enough for my taste. Now, in our shows, we don't usually have time for questions, and it's not a question and answer format. But if there is anyone who has a question in the audience, I thought I felt a burning question, so please.
Hi. Joan Stevens from the Watershed Sentinel. I'm just puzzled because when I was in Copenhagen, Bolivia was calling for the temperature not to rise above 1 degree and for the parts per million to go back to 300. And when I'd leave the press room, I saw all these people from 350.org jumping up and down saying that it should be 350 because of James Hansen. Because he said that. And so they were, to a certain extent, undermining what Bolivia was calling for, which doesn't make sense now with what you've been saying.
Okay, I perhaps let me try to field that. 350, I have a great respect for them. They have organized around a number and tried to make it in humanity's awareness. Personally, I don't see any conflict, just as I see no conflict between science and religion, science and faith. I see no conflict between calling for 350 parts per million and calling for 300 parts per million. We got to get there as fast as possible. So instead of looking for the differences between two groups that message slightly differently, I would see the commonality that they're both saying 400 parts per million where we are now is way too much. Okay, we're out of time. Thank you much for joining us today, and we'll be back in just a short while with one more Climate Matters show. Thank you.